Hi ladies, Megan here. This week we are going to make the wedge that includes the lighthouse block, and here is the lighthouse block in my finished tree skirt. And right here is the very first few steps of my lighthouse block stitched out. There's a couple of tricks I want to talk to you about this week, and the skipping technique that I'm going to introduce to you. So we are going to work through several of the steps together. We're not going to do everything, but we are going to get through quite a bit of it. Okay? All right, so I have stitched through, I'm about to stitch stop number 5, which will be the tack down line for the house. And on the lighthouse, it's a little bit confusing, but this is the house, this is the light tower. And we're gonna work through this together for a couple of reasons. One being that they also had you do this a little bit differently, and we do that differently, and we do the roof differently, okay? So I have stitched, this is what I've done so far. I put my USB stick in my machine. I turned my machine on. I went to my USB stick on my open files, and I went to my Designs by Juju tree skirt. I went to 8 by 12. I opened main block 8, which is the lighthouse. And for those of you who have a Janome 550, once I got to the ready to sew screen, I hit home, I hit grid, I changed my hoop size to be hoop 36B, and then I hit OK in the bottom of the grid screen to take me back to the ready to sew screen. I stitched my batting placement line, my batting tack down line, my main fabric tack down line, and stop number 4 was the house placement. And now I'm ready to put my fabric on for my house. And I have my fabric right here, but I wanted to show you something because on your directions, I do tell you to add SF101. Whenever I am using white fabric or fabric with a white background in a block that includes in the hoop applique, I always add SF101 to the back of it. And for these blocks, you're going to get the SF101 from all the leftovers from when you were cutting and fusing that first week of the tree skirt. You can see my piece here doesn't quite reach the edges, but that's okay. That also prevents me from getting sticky stuff all over everywhere. The reason we do this is because here I have a piece of white fabric with no SF101 on the back. I'm going to lay it down on my paper here, and you can see all the black shadow through. When I lay down my piece with SF101 on it, you see almost no black shadow through. Now, you might think, well, Megan, we're using a very neutral colored background. Nothing on my background fabric is going to shadow through anyway. And that might be true, but the other problem I have had in the past with white fabric and applique blocks is if there's a thread that gets stuck underneath. If you had a red thread or a gray thread and it got stuck underneath here, that could be just like your black words and you would get shadow through. If there's something on your background fabric that there's a piece of fuzz that gets in there, you can get shadow through. That obviously isn't going to happen with red or green fabric, but it does happen a lot with white fabric. I see it on the long arm too. So the way we prevent that is by putting SF101 on the back. And now I'm going to take my piece of fabric, I'm going to put it over my placement line completely, lower my presser foot, and stitch out my first house. Stitch out my house, my tack out. Okay? So at this point, I am going to do all of my placement and tack down lines for this block. I am going to come back on, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do, nope, I'm going to stick with you for just a minute, okay? I am going to pause and trim my fabric, and then I will be right back. Okay, ladies, I'm back. My apologies, I actually made a piece of this video and realized that I had said some things wrong, so here we are. This is how far I have gotten. I'm about to stitch out step 10. So what I did, since I left you, although in a metaverse we were together while I did it, I did the roof tack down, the roof placement line, and I put the piece of roof fabric on and did the roof tack down line and trimmed around it. And then I put SF101 on the back of this. This was steps 8 and 9. It says steps 8 and 9 are red stripes placement. We did this light tower all white, so those pieces are white fabric even though it says red in your description, okay? And I did the placement lines and the tack down lines, and I trimmed around them. And now I'm on step 10. My apologies for any confusion. Now we are on step 10, which is the white stripes placement line. So we're going to go ahead and stitch that out. And while I stitch out a lot of this stuff, I'm going to attempt to answer a couple of questions about things that have come up. The first thing people seem to want to know is, how close do you need to trim your fabric when you're doing your, after you trim your fabric away, which I'm going to show you and talk about right now after we place this fabric. Okay, so I am going to place my white fabric, and again, this is the white stripes. The red stripes are also white, just, you know, because we felt like being confusing. So this is going to stitch down 2 rows of stitching because it is a tack down line, not a placement line. I think you've probably noticed by now, placement lines, it does 1 line of stitching, and tack down lines, it does 2 lines of stitching. I don't know why. My suspicion is because 2 rows of stitching are more stable, and we want your fabric to stay in place. And now it's going to be time to trim my fabric. And while I am trimming my fabric, I'm going to talk to you about 2 different things. One is, how close do I trim? And the answer is as close as you are possibly able. I find these little curvy snips let me get pretty close. I've tried the duckbill scissors in the past. This is what a lot of people recommend for trimming fabric. I like these if you're doing really big pieces, but if I'm doing small pieces, which is the case most of the time with applique, I like these little ones. The answer to the question, how close should I get, is as close as you possibly can. You don't want to snip through your line, your stitching line, if you know, that would be bad. But the closer you can get, the neater your final project. If any of you have in the last couple of blocks found that you have fuzzy edges on your satin stitching, which and I'm sorry, I know my hands are in the way here for this line. The satin stitching is the line of stitching, the decorative stitching it does, where it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, really, really close together to make the edge of your applique really, really pretty. If you've gotten any fuzzy edged satin stitches, what that is it's your fabric sticking out. So you don't want to clip your stitches. You want to get as close as you possibly can. If sometimes you get so close that you can see that the edge is fraying, the edge of your fabric is fraying underneath your stitching, if it doesn't fray past the stitching, you're still okay, because the satin stitches are going to go about 1/8 of an inch in and 1/8 of an inch out, so 1/8 of an inch on either side of this tack down line. So as long as your fabric is going to get caught underneath that satin stitching, and I'm sorry, I just knocked the camera over. I'm really batting 1,000 today. In the meantime, also the mailman came. I'm here by myself on Monday, and the mailman came and he saw the lights on, so he knocked on the door, and he scared me so bad that he was laughing. But anyway, okay, so if your fabric is going to be underneath your satin stitching, you're fine, because the satin stitching will completely enclose all of the edges of your fabric. You don't have to worry about it, okay? Okay, So now we are on step 12, which is the light tower roof placement line. So we're going to go ahead and stitch that out, and then we are going to add the red striped fabric. This other piece of red striped fabric. And I want to get you through the satin stitch outline of this house, that roof right there, because that's the part where we did something a little bit different. Okay, the other thing that we have had starting to happen to people is, and it happened to at least 3 of you on the teddy bear block and 1 of you on the church block, was the satin stitching was off when it was time to do the, okay, you guys are all gonna laugh. If possible, I want these stripes to go the same way. So I'm gonna turn this so that it all goes the same way. That's not the way that piece was intended to be used. I think it was intended to be used turned the other way. As long as your fabric completely covers your placement lines, you can use that fabric in any direction you want. We are going to talk about what would make your satin stitching be off here in just a few minutes, as soon as we get all of the applique fabric on. Most embroiderers recommend using tape to hold your fabric down. That is not my favorite thing to do, but it is a great technique and one I use when I'm using really tiny pieces of fabric. You need to keep your fingers away from the needle while it's going. I would think that would seem obvious, but maybe it isn't. But I'm always smoothing my fabric and messing with it. I do the same thing on the long arm. Okay, and see, I've got, there's a little piece here. I want to trim closer. Okay. Now we are going to do tree placement. And then for your trees, we have these 2 fun pieces of green fabric that looks like it has, we thought it looked like it had lights in your trees, like Christmas time. For these trees, I am absolutely going to use tape. And here is why. You see the machine moving all over the place, right? You saw it just, it's got to go back and forth and back and forth. When the machine moves like that, there is a definite possibility that it is going to, let's see, I'm trying to get these blue lights down here all in there. The presser foot often will go under your piece of fabric, push it up, push it back, flip it over on itself, and then stitch it down. So, in those situations, I like the placement lines because they give you an opportunity to see how the machine moves. Because it's going to move the same way it just moved around to do your placement lines. It's the same way it's going to move around to do your tack down lines. So we got to see what direction did your hoop move underneath your needle. So that's how I decided I was going to put tape here and here, because that presser foot is going to go over here. And if it gets caught up under, it's going to flip your fabric over, stitch it down, and now you have to rip. And we don't want to do that. So in this situation, I absolutely use tape because I don't want to have to rip, and I don't want to have it flipping over on itself. I had one of you ask me, how come the pieces of fabric are so big? If you're doing a small or a medium-sized tree skirt, the pieces of fabric are really big because we just cut everybody's fabric the same size, because trimming all these pieces of fabric for everybody is not hard, but it definitely gets a lot more complicated when we try to account for everybody's sizes. The reason the pieces of fabric are so big, even on the large tree skirt, is one, to give you guys some wiggle room, and two, the very real reason for me is just because that's the size Ginger told you to cut them in her directions, and we just did what she said. So, if you want to try to trim fabric down, do my best, but that is why the pieces of fabric are so big. Okay, so now we're going to trim the trees, and while we do this, you'll notice most of the time when I'm trimming, I disconnect my hoop. I don't know if you guys realize this, but the embroidery arms are very, very delicate, and they are not, believe me, even the weakest among us, our muscles are stronger than those embroidery arms. So we can actually move the embroidery arm while we're trimming. And that is very, very bad, because if we move the embroidery arm while we are trimming, we can shift, sorry guys, we can shift the center of our embroidery and cause the embroidery to be off. So if during this, during the trimming, I pushed too hard or something started to fall and I jerked my arm or something like that, I could actually make my embroidery arm move a little bit. And embroidery is a very, very finely calibrated activity for your machine. So if you move your arm even just 1/8 of an inch, what happens when you go to do the next step is your entire project has been shifted over 1/8 of an inch. So those of you that had satin stitching on your teddy bear that made your teddy bear look off, that's probably what happened. Probably at some point you accidentally, because nobody would do this on purpose, pushed your embroidery arm, or your embroidery arm hit something. I had that one time. My embroidery arm was hitting another sewing machine because I was using it on the display out front, and it was hitting another sewing machine, and halfway through my design it kept getting off, and I thought, uh-oh, there's something wrong with I really thought there was something wrong with the way they had digitized the design, but no, I was just, you know, having a moment. I'm actually asking a couple of people to bring in their messed up blocks. Now we're going to do the bush placement line. And I'm going to do a short video about what happened and how to fix it. The answer how to fix it most of the time is you're going to have to start over, but sometimes if you know when it got screwed up, you can fix it. But I will be doing a short video in the next couple weeks about how to fix it. So now we're just going to put our bush fabric down, and then we will be done placing all of our fabric, and we are going to move on to what you need to know about stitching out the roof and about skipping some stitches, because it's a technique I used a lot while I did this project. So I waited for my machine to stop moving completely before I touch it, because that's one of those ways that you can knock it out of alignment. And now I'm just trimming up the bush, and then we will be to satin stitching, and we just have to do one thing before we get to the ruff. Okay, so now we are going to do, what are we doing? Tree outline. So we're going to switch to color number 695. Just have to rethread my machine. Almost done. I'm not going to, my machine is, the tension on my machine is really, really good right now. So it will be okay for me to continue with a white bobbin. But if the tension of your machine is off at all, at this point you could, with a dark colored thread, switch to a black bobbin, okay? But that's up to you. So now it's going to do, these are the satin stitches. These are satin stitches, and you'll notice that it always lays foundation stitches first. It does these big zigzag stitches. It does usually a couple layers, depending on how big your satin stitches are and how wide they are, how long they are, all different things. The designer of the pattern may decide to do more layers of the zigzag stitches, but those are foundation stitches, and the whole goal there is to keep your satin stitches stay nice and poofy above your fabric. So that's what's happening right now. This is my favorite part, how it does those really tall ones on top. I think that's so cool. You can see that the fabric choice let the trees look like they have legs. Fabric choice with embroidery is quite often very different than your fabric choice for regular sewing. Regular sewing is usually all about the fabric, and embroidery you have to decide, is this all about the fabric or is it all about the stitches? If there's competition for attention, then you get a mess, and you don't notice anything. You don't notice the fabric, you don't notice the stitching. So most of the time we tried to decide, what do we want to stand out more, the fabric or the stitching? And a lot of times we want the stitching to stand out, but every once in a while we want the fabric to stand out. And that is actually how I made the choice in the next step to skip some of the roof stitches. This block was made in honor of my mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law, who is no longer with us, she loved lighthouses, and she loved peppermint ice cream. So when it was time to do this lighthouse block, because originally we weren't necessarily thinking that this was going to be a sew along, it was just everybody in the shop was so fascinated with this tree skirt that we decided we were just going to make it to see what happened, and what kind of program the tree skirt would lend itself to. When we got to this block, I said to my mom, oh, I want to make this block to remind everybody in honor of Mary, because she loved lighthouses. So we decided we wanted the lighthouse to look like a candy cane, a peppermint striped candy, kind of like peppermint ice cream. So we picked fabric to look like peppermint, and that was why the lighthouse we did all white instead of white and red, because So that is how this block came to be. And for this block, how we decided between the fabric, did you want the fabric to stand out or the stitching to stand out? Our goal was to make it look like a candy cane, so we did things that would make it look like a candy cane. Okay guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut out until we get to the roof outline, and then I will begin. Okay guys, I have to apologize to you if this video seems a little bit disjointed. I actually found this block to be a little bit confusing the first time I did it, and it turns out I am finding it a little bit confusing the second time I'm doing it. So it probably doesn't surprise anyone, but okay, so here we are. We are on step 20. Since I saw you last, we finished up stitching the tree satin stitching, and then I didn't realize it needed to stitch this. It's called the house outline and light tower fill. The fill stitching is all of this pretty white stitching it does over here to fill in the tower, and the outline is here, and then down along the bottom of this house and along the side. And now it's ready to do the outline of this roof. It wants to put some scalloped stitching along the edge here as well, and then it is going to do some stripes over here of red. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, I told you before, I didn't want the scalloped stitching. I want this fabric to stand out, and what it wants to do, I'm gonna pick you up and move you here just a little bit, is it wants to put, see the scalloped stitching right there all over the roof? And I decided I didn't want that. Skipping things is always an option that is always a choice we can make in embroidery. So what I did was I figured out where I needed to start to skip all the scalloped stitching. And wherever it tells you on your screen what stitch number you're at and lets you advance or go back, that's where you're going to go. And you want to start on stitch number 9104. Now this machine starts out going one at a time, one stitch at a time, and then if you watch the stitches, then it starts to jump by tens, and then it jumps by hundreds. So I got to 9100, and now I want to go to 9104. Okay, sometimes this is another option. Okay, so for Janome owner, that's the way you do it universally. Okay, Janome owners also have the option, hold on one second, I'm going to go back to the beginning of step number 20. You can see I'm back on 8603 here. Janome 550 owners, you can hit this, you can type in 9104, hit OK, and it jumps directly there. Okay, so that's a really cool feature of this machine. And now what it's going to do is it's going to start stitching the house outline satin stitch instead of stitching all those scallops. I have to show my big long thread here. There we go. That is what I wanted to show you, okay? So you're going to see on your, I'm going to stop this so it's not so loud. You're going to see on your places sometimes, I've put it in red if I've skipped something or I've messed with things. So I said I skipped the roof stitches and began at stitch 9104. We are going to get to things, we're going to do things along the way where we're going to stitch maybe to stitch 10,000 and then skip 10,001 to 10,099. We do little things like that throughout. So it's important that you know how to navigate your stitches on your machines. So take this opportunity, if you have a machine that isn't a Janome, to figure out how can I go about skipping stitches and jumping around in my design. I'm going to finish stitching this out off camera. That's what I wanted to show you. The rest of this is pretty much the same. After this step, there are 7 more. that are just basic color changes and then stitch out normal, okay? If you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. If you have any issues, please let us know. If you have had a design get knocked out of calibration and you need more fabric, just let us know. We are prepared to have to give people extra kits. This isn't that much fabric. It's not that big a deal. So instead of getting upset and freaking out, just let us know and we are happy to talk to you about what might have happened. Like I said, watch for that video later in the week about what happens when your machine gets knocked out of calibration. Okay? All right, you guys, good luck. Merry Christmas.